Thank you, Ruchi. It's indeed a privilege. It's indeed my privilege to be able to participate in this discussion on just transitions. And I think Terry has done a remarkable job. I think for the first time, we're focusing on the issues of what can happen once the coal mines close and once the functional townships that have these coal mines begin to face the problem. I'm also very happy to find that all our distinguished speakers are on board, and we'll look forward to some very interesting discussions. I think I'll now request Ruchi, without wasting too much time, request Ruchi to deliver a brief presentation, which is based on the study which she and her colleagues and under Amit's leadership, they have done in the district called Betul in Madhya Pradesh, which had some of the initial coal mines and which is now also facing the downside impact of the coal mines closing. So this study should be of great importance and should be some kind of a path-breaking effort in this study of just transition. So Ruchi, please start.
May I request we launch the study here before we begin the, the presentation?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. How do you launch?
This is a virtual launch.
How do you cut the ribbon?
It's virtually cut, Sanjay. Sanjay was hoping for a pair of virtual scissors.
I know. I was looking for it. Yeah, Ruchi, all yours now.
Thank you, sir. We were hoping that Dr. Anil Kumar Jain, the Secretary of Ministry of Coals, would join us, but it seems he is still into a meeting. But nevertheless, I think we shall now begin with the presentation without further ado. Well, so this is the study mapping the impact of coal mines and their closure. As Mr. Mitra already introduced the study, the region, it is being done in Betul in Madhya Pradesh. And I will take you through some of the critical issues in transition that we understood from the region. A brief on the research objective and background. Now, this study was, as you mentioned, was undertaken in Betul in Madhya Pradesh. The coal mines fall under the Western Coalfields Limited of Coal India. The mines that operated here were all underground mines. Now, the study was primarily undertaken to understand the impact of coal mine closures. 4 mines out of 10 had closed. 3 closed in quick succession between 2010 and 2013 due to resource exhaustion. 2 more mines are slated to close by March 2021. In fact, the picture that you see on your right, this mine will also go away in March 2021. Now, coal... Yeah.
Actually, we are not seeing any pictures.
Yeah, presentation is not visible.
Oh, I see. I see. आप आ जाइए इधर.
Yes.
All right. So yes. Now I think I'll repeat this. The primary objective of the study was understanding the impact of mine closures, where 4 out of 10 underground coal mines closed due to resource exhaustion. 2 more mines slated to close by March 2021. And the picture of the mines that will now be closed is on your right. We also, newer mines have been proposed, and they still are in the process. They are awaiting the clearances. The second objective of the study was to, before that, a brief background that coal mining in the district has a history of about 150 years. So the study also looked at the various economic, social, and political impacts and the linkages that came about with coal. Now, some of these linkages were weak and some were strong, but nevertheless, there was no denial that coal occupied a very central place in the district. Next slide. All right. So here we actually try to understand the linkages of coal in the district's larger economy. The district's gross domestic product is largely based on its primary sector, predominantly agriculture. The graph on your left-hand side will show you the composition of the primary sector.
Ruchi, can I just intervene? The screen needs to move. Your slide need to move, and maybe we have a full screen. Screen is this the full screen?
This is a full screen, sir.
Okay,
yes.
Then you need to move the slides. Slides are not moving.
We are on slide 3 of 15.
No. You need to move them.
Ruchi, it is not on full screen and slides are not moving actually.
So here we begin from the second slide in understanding the district's gross domestic product, which is largely based on its primary sector and predominantly on agriculture. The primary sector accounts for 44% of the district's GDP. Mining also gets included in the primary sector here. You will find the gross value added by mining declined after the 3 mines closed between 2010 and 2013. The bar in red will show you the decline. You will find a subsequent decline in the secondary sector, particularly in manufacturing, in electricity, and in construction. Similar decline was also observed in the tertiary sector, particularly in trade and financial services. Now, some of these correlations brings us actually face to face with the coal's interaction with the district's economy. Similarly, the figure here shows the fall in Betul's ranking immediately after mine closure. Now, the district's ranking in its overall per capita income amongst the 51 districts in the state, you will find a steep fall where the ranking actually fell from 18 to 36 in a matter of 3 years. We talk about the urbanization that was brought about by coal in the district. An entire new town in the district called Sarni was actually emerged. With the influx of workers, traders, and businesses, Sarni emerged as a key town. it assumed greater significance than even the district headquarters called Betul. The graph here shows a growth of two key towns in the district. The blue bar shows Betul and the red districts depicts Sarni. Now, between 1981 and 2001, you will find the increased growth in population of Sarni, which is attributed to the mass recruitment in the industry. But as in how the mines closed, the industry declined, you will find that the population of Betul has also fallen. Now, this whole town faces this unique problem of depopulation, which has its own ramifications. It has also resulted in a fall in the local economy of the place. The property rates of the revenue land has declined. And even the local municipality faces a challenge in developing a master plan for the town. Now that the industry emerged as a strong player in the district is evident from the skewed concentration of infrastructure in favor of Gora Dongri. Now, Gora Dongri is a sub-district where the industry is located. The highlighted box before you in the figure shows a relatively higher road density, both metalled and unmetalled in Gora Dongri subdivision. We go further down at the level of the households to find the impact of the industry. You can see the tilt once again here, where we have shown the distribution of household access to treated tap water. This holds true for several other services in the district, such as sanitation, banking services, amongst others. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that it was only the urban where this growth took place. The rural neighborhood, which you find marked in blue here, was left behind. The study also attempted at understanding the employment scenario in the district. The district witnessed increased marginalization of its workforce in the last 3 decades. The proportion of its main workers, that is those who were employed for a period of 6 months or more, declined, giving way to increased marginal workforce. The 65% of the current main workforce has about close to 80% people who are in agriculture. And again, in agriculture, an overwhelming majority of people are employed as agricultural laborers. The state and the industry continue to provide for the highest employment in the district. Now, with the industry, a whole new class of workers emerged, workers with formal and secure jobs, jobs with entitlements. This spurred the demand for a whole set of goods and services, creating induced livelihoods that depends upon them. We take you now to the cost transition that has already set into the industry. The graph above shows the declining regular workforce in the coal field, as you see in blue, as well as in the neighboring power plant, as seen in red. The decline in the workforce is a natural decline due to superannuation. New recruitments are restricted only to statutory and to compensatory jobs. The second graph in green at the bottom shows the corresponding increase in the contract economy and economy of informal workers. So to summarize some of the critical issues that has come up from this study, yes, if on the one hand, there was an influx of workers into the district due to coal, there has also been an increasing outflux of people due to the lack of opportunities. The evidence of this we have in the high number of returnees to the district during the peak pandemic times. The increasing trend to informality, sorry, I lost my slide. Where is the presentation? I'm sorry, we'll have to pause. I don't see my presentation on the screen.
Okay, you go ahead, get it.
आप ले जाइए. Sorry, yeah. So the increasing trend to informality has its own cascading effect. If on the one hand, there were public sector workers with inflation-adjusted salaries, on the other, there are those with wages a little above the prevailing minimum wage in the state. Precarious jobs and the race to the bottom will damage the labor market of the future. In the immediate vicinity of the industry itself, the rural picture is one of extreme distress. 65% of the rural households in Ghora Dongri depend upon manual casual labor. The low incomes, as seen from the socioeconomic caste census, shows 90% of the rural households, the highest earning member, earn less than 5,000 rupees a month. Low literacy levels are seen in the sub-districts as well. Of those literates, only 6% could complete secondary levels and less than 3% completed graduation. The poor educational attainments will erode their employability in the economic sectors of today. The local agrarian community, comprising mostly of the indigenous tribes, the Gonds, face marginal returns from agriculture. As arable lands have shrunk, water tables have depleted, produce affected by coal dust and fly ash, they also have a problem of reduced market because of the depopulation of Sarni for their agricultural produce. Now, this slide, yes, we've called it hearing from the people firsthand. The first picture on your left, which is youth expressing their concerns, was from our interaction with the youth in the area. They shared what an aspirational labor market to them is. It is one where they find jobs that match their skills. Technical skills are promoted and information gaps on education and employment opportunities are addressed. The second picture in the center was an exercise to understand from the community their experiences of the industry from a pre-mining phase to now, after a period of 2.5 decades of mining. The third picture on your right is that of land subsidence in the farm due to underground mining. So going forward, the way ahead, what the study has proposed, that yes, this region so far has depended upon coal and mining may continue to play an important role for some time. New mines may open up, but the growth prospects for livelihoods may be limited. We recommend that tailor-made approach be drawn for the district. There needs to be an increasing focus on rural incomes. Besides jobs, people also need infrastructure, both physical infrastructure such as roads, as well as service infrastructure such as banking, education, healthcare, amongst others. The study also recommends strengthening agriculture. A dramatic leap away from agriculture cannot be expected. Reviving the once popularly indigenously grown millets, reprioritizing agroforestry has been emphasized. Promoting micro, small, and medium enterprises to diversify the local economy will go a long way. We find in the vicinity of the industry only retail and repair related enterprises that have thrived. People have shared some of the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises in the district that depended upon coal from the coal field have had to be relocated. Now, considering the anticipated needs of the future, we strongly recommend building a cadre of skilled workforce. Renewed focus on matching opportunities and capabilities needs to be brought in. Intervention in the district will need the convergence of efforts of the private, the state, and the public sector undertaking in planning and mobilizing resources. And in conclusion, I would like to state that Betul is illustrative of the challenges faced by other mining districts of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruchi. It is for a very crisp and clear presentation. The Betul study, distinguished delegates, is really an eye-opener. It presents the ground realities in a manner that is unprecedented. And we perhaps need to replicate such studies in future. We will be, this interaction today will probably give us a lot of guidance. I now call upon Mr. Amit Kumar, who comes to us with a wonderful blend of experience in academics, in project implementation, and in international consultancy assignments, as well as a university administrator. So he is the Senior Director of Social Transformation and Knowledge Management in TERI, and has had a long and active association with all the initiatives that TERI has taken. And he's an expert in renewable energy and has done a lot of work on renewable resources-based technological solutions. So Amit, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. And hello, everyone. In fact, I must admit that the study that was spearheaded by Ruchi was a journey of learning for me because, as Mr. Mitra just now said, I learned a lot of hard reality that we tend to overlook when we are sitting here. So looking at what are the critical issues in transition, the first and foremost is that in India, we do not seem to have even realized that there is a need for a transition strategy. And the fact that that strategy is not going to be decided and designed at a national level, rather it would be amalgamation of smaller region-specific plans and strategies. Now, when I compare that with the European Union, at least they are going into that direction. They have their just transition mechanism where they are trying to ensure that transition towards a climate neutral economy happens in a fair way, and as they call, leaving no one behind. The other issue, as I look at it, pertains to the fact that the social dimension, as very clearly brought out by Ruchi in her presentation, is going to be at the core of just transition, especially in a country like India, where in any case there are a lot of inequalities and disparities. So the issue remains, how do we formally involve workers and community in that strategy framework? Because most of the time these strategies are designed by experts, and by the time it reaches community for consultation, already many of the options have been narrowed down. And the last challenge, as I look at it, links with the ground reality that the huge workforce is in the informal sector and does not have any safety net. Needless to say, these workers are more vulnerable and at a greater risk of losing their livelihood. Now, when we consider the situation in these coal-producing states particularly, situation becomes even much more complex, because if we were to consider human development indices, these are at the bottommost rung, even from the point of view of Indian benchmarks, forget the global ones. And what we have seen in the UNDP study is that loss due to inequality is higher than the national level in these states. And where the inequality lies is the highest with respect to education, health, and income dimensions. Now, when we look at energy or electricity transition in country, primarily it has been looked into from two angles, environmental and technical perspective, where we are looking more from the grid integration and all those things. However, communities that are potentially going to be affected the most, we are going to leave them on their own to manage the impact in the transition. So how do we manage these things? Again, it's very simplistic way, but then it's very clear that we have to have an early assessment of the social and employment impacts of climate policies. Number of times we speak in terms of so many millions or billions of jobs being created in clean energy sector. But again, looking things at aggregate level actually at times hide many of the realities that actually happen on the ground. So what kind of jobs that are being created, what kind of skill set that would be required, whether that would be suitable for people who are going to be most affected by this transition, all those things. So obviously we are talking of training and skill development, redeployment, the chance to further develop their skills and make a contribution in new sectors, and definitely a social security net. However, as I look at it, apart from skilling the existing workforce for alternative livelihood options, I think equally important is to emphasize on the educating the next generation, because they are going to come out in a situation where they won't have the kind of employment opportunities their parents would have. Also critical in my mind is to develop local economic diversification plan, as Ruchi also very clearly brought out, which can provide decent work. And I'm emphasizing the word decent work. Now, besides short-term plans to deal with such eventualities, it is also important to develop long-term strategic transition plans. To realize just transition, there is also need to take into account needs and concerns of women and socially backward people who actually most of the time are left out, but they are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of the transition the most. So where do we actually go from here? So that means for just transition to work, the process need to be owned at the local or at the regional level. But the paradox is that these are the people who lack the political power. They don't have institutional capacity to plan and manage broad systemic changes. So therefore, as I see, establishing and strengthening institutional and technical capacities of subnational authorities will have to be taken up simultaneously when we are planning something. The action and investment needed for the just transition are definitely going to cost a lot. And that means we also need to look into how we are going to finance that, from where the investment is going to come. Probably establishing a just transition fund could be one way of dealing with it. Now, I am not very sure the district mineral funds that are being set up, whether they have that much of capability to deal with this. My intuition is that we would require much more than that. And again, I look at the European Union's example there, where they are planning to mobilize at least 150 billion euros over the next 7 years to alleviate the socio-economic impact of the transition. In the end, I would just recall what our Honorable Prime Minister said yesterday during his inaugural address. And he said, quote, "Road to fighting climate change is through climate justice," unquote. I feel that we must acknowledge that just transition is an intrinsic part of the climate justice that we are talking about. And I think that our starting point must be a commitment that no one will be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I will stop here and I would be available for any clarification or any question thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you very much for a very clear presentation and very clear thoughts. And so we would like to hear our other participants. So now I would request Ruchi to do the video from Professor Kuntala Lahiri Dutt, who is a professor of Resource and Development Program at the Crossroads School of Public Policy in the Australian National University. She's done a lot of work, particularly her work in the Indian coal sector is of great importance, and she's one of the few academics who's actually done a lot of work in this field. And so over to you, Ruchi, and we should start the presentation.
Sonal, we need to play Professor Kuntala's video here.
Hello everyone, my name is Kuntala. I'm a professor at the Resource, Environment and Development Program in the Crossroads School of Public Policy in the Australian National University. I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. A.K. Saxena and Ms. Ruchi Gupta for this invite to me to speak in this important conference. Let me share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint presentation for you. So this is the title of my presentation today. In this presentation, I want to step back and ask some basic questions. Questions such as what kind of justice, whose transition, and from where to where when we talk about just transition. So the point I want to make is that there is not one coal economy in India, and any framework of just transition must take the multiplicities of coal economies into consideration. I show that there are 4 coal economies in India with varied degrees of legality and formalization. A transition away from coal would need to consider different aspects of justice and the goal of transition. So let me clarify. The concept of justice ingrained in the idea of just transition is intimately linked to morality, not simply laws. So justice would involve human consensus and societal norms. The four types of justice are well known: procedural justice, fair treatment to all; distributive justice, which means who gets what; restorative justice, that aims to bring righteousness; and retributive justice, which is punishment for misdeeds. Now, these four types can be applied in different degrees to social context to make it a social justice idea, or organizational context, or in the context of the environment. In just transition, we want to make sure that in trying to bring environmental justice through decarbonization, we do not hurt some groups of people more than the others. So basically, what we are doing is we want to ensure social justice. At the heart of social justice lies redistribution of power. This redistribution is possible by following the 5 key principles: access to resources, equity, diversity, participation, and human rights. So as to the goal of just transition, we can identify different forms of green economies. On the one hand, there is what Ashley Dawson describes as green capitalism. This genre of thought is seen in mainstream policy approaches that aim to create more sustainable economies or green economies through investments, market-based interventions, and technological developments in renewable energy and low-carbon sectors. So on the other hand, activists and environmental rights-based movements challenge whether a focus on high growth can in fact be sustainable, and propose alternative visions for economies that are based on sufficiency, solidarity, and well-being. And in between the two extremes, ecological economists are thinking about ways to create a regenerative economy or a Green New Deal based on a move away from exploitative and unsustainable production patterns that are coupled with investments in the informal economy. So now, a just transition away from coal in India will need to first choose the kind of justice, the principles of justice, and then decide which goal it will strive for. So I will explain this through a diagram in my presentation. See, this slide shows you the production of in million tons of different types of coal. I call it different types of coal because they are produced by different actors within the economy. National coal is produced by the nationalized mining company, Coal India Limited. Neoliberal coal, obviously, is produced by the private companies that are now involved in mining, coal mining. Subsistence coal is also quite clearly, it's the what we call illegal mining of coal, goes on from Raniganj, Asansol area to Ranchi, Hazaribagh area continuously. In that, if you travel through the highways and get off the highway, look into the villages and in the forested tracts, you would see what's going on there. And I call it subsistence because basically it provides not much more than subsistence to the communities that are involved in it. But then there is also a fourth type of coal, which I'm calling statecraft coal, which is non-legal. It's non-legal because it's sort of falling through the cracks of various, layers and layers of laws around coal that exists. So statecraft coal is mined in Meghalaya, which has a special status in Indian constitution, which allows the local indigenous communities to own the resources under their land. However, coal is also at the same time to be extracted only by the big companies. So on the one hand, they have the right of coal and they have been mining it for a long time. On the other hand, they cannot legally do it. So I call it non-legal because it's just not explained by the current legal system that we have. If you look at how many people are involved in these coal economies, you would be astounded. National Coal, which is in Coal India Limited, and as you can see, this is about 4 years old, that data, 450,000 people employed in mining, the formal or national coal, and then you would also find, a lot of people who are hiding away within the informal, within the formal coal mining sector. So, for example, Coal India Limited contracts out a lot of its mining activity, about 50%. So I have, figured out that this is a more labor-intensive mining activity. So informal employment in the national coal, in production of national coal, would be 200,000. I don't know, probably a lot more. Similarly, if you look at neoliberal coal, total employment is only about 60,000. But if you look at informal employment in this neoliberal coal sector, another 50,000 people would probably be involved. Subsistence coal economy, in comparison, although it produces a lot less, a large number of people are involved. 400,000 people are in, sort of ballpark figure. So these are all ballpark figures, but based on educated estimates and extensive field work, as I said. Similarly, in Meghalaya, we can assume that there are 100,000 people involved in non-legal coal mining production. So what is the lesson that we draw from these 4 coal economies? The lesson that we can draw is valuable for considering a just transition in India. So we can see that the informal economy is not entirely separate from the formal economy. Informality is something that exists both in the traditional informal economy and hidden within the formal coal mining sector. So coal is not just a fossil fuel. It passes through a long value chain, and innumerable people are involved in this chain. It is not only the use of coal, but where it is used is also important. Is it used in pithead or farther apart? Much has been said about the railways, whose 48% of the volume of freight is constituted by coal. The railways also overcharge the transportation of coal and petroleum. So forget about these and just think about the trucking industry, the massive number of brick kilns, and the piece rate laborers who are working on daily wage basis for the large number of contractors. So all these people, all these things will need to be considered in thinking about just transition away from coal in India. So to conclude, I would say that we need degrowth because the current growth paradigm perpetuates environmental injustices. Degrowth rejects the notion that economic growth is an inevitable, unquestioned social and political objective. Instead, I propose a transformative shift away from GDP being of central importance, instead focusing on well-being, social justice, and ecological sustainability. An important distinction that I make is that degrowth does not necessarily mean negative GDP growth or degrowth across all sectors. A degrowth agenda requires some sectors of the economy to flourish, such as education, care work, and health, all of which have been left within the informal economy. High polluting sectors such as coal would be scaled back as part of the transition to renewable energy, but these other sectors will create enough opportunities for many, thus creating better and improved livelihoods for everyone. To make this transition a reality, we must shift away from the business as usual mindset and invite the participation of environmental justice movements, workers' organizations, and human rights groups from around the country to shape the new just transition for India. Thank you very much for listening to me. That's all I wanted to say today. Thank you.
Thanks to Professor Lahiri Dutt for a wonderful presentation, and it has clarified some very deep conceptual issues. It was particularly, I relate to one interesting concept about the informal coal, since I worked in West Bengal for most of my career, and I can relate to what she's saying in some of our coal-bearing districts like Burdwan, and now of course Asansol and Purulia. And I think she has actually put her finger on a pulse that we are probably missing when we are talking of the organized coal sector as such in Betul. The problem in Meghalaya is completely different. The problem in these, so they call illegal coal mines, is also completely different. We probably need to think about it afresh. Thank you again. I now call upon a very bright civil servant, young civil servant from Madhya Pradesh, Tejaswi Naik, who was, one of the let's say, main proponents of this study that has been done. At that time, now of course he has switched jobs as a good civil servant should do, and he is no longer in the district of Betul where he was. And I will now call upon Tejaswi to share his views. Tejaswi, all yours.
Sonal, we need to put Tejaswi ji from Neeraj's ID here.
Tejaswi is only half visible. Like all good civil servants, he's not fully visible. He needs to be fully visible. Tejaswi Bhaiya, you need to be fully visible. Get back. Picture. No. Now better. Much better. Go on. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, sir, for having me here. And there was an initial glitch, as it usually happens in our offices. I had to change the system, and now I'm finally here. Though my name would be reading as Neeraj, I'm not Neeraj. I'm Tejaswi Naik. So I would like to thank. Am I visible?
Yeah.
I would like to thank Ruchi Gupta for doing this study, especially when I was posted in the district. I had a very small and sweet tenure in Betul, one of the shortest I have had. I was there only for 9 months. And I was just going through the presentations that have been presented here before me by all the esteemed panelists. I will put across what I could observe as just a bystander there, because usually wherever we get posted, we get to taste the piece of history of that place, and we carry a lot of memories of those places also. So Betul, I was the 152nd collector, and just yesterday 154th collector has been posted there. It's a beautiful forested district which is going to be 200 years old next year. So quite a rich history for a district. Region wise, it has been quite a sleepy kind of area. Not much you can gather from the gazetteer or from the historical records. Yeah, I think now it is fine. Most of the history is since the Britishers came in, and Betul gets its name mainly because of the teak teak that was in abundance there. The teak was sought after everywhere. It is only in the independent India when the coal industry started and a lot of population movement happened that Betul got that much needed impetus, which Ruchi was also showing in her presentation. There is definitely a quite a varied income generating activities going on. And surprisingly, the highest level of income, if you go through the data, it is in the most forested and in one of the most interior areas where the coal industry is there. That coal industry also has one of the power generation companies there, which adds to the local mix. I recall when I joined in 2019 June, while having discussion with my superintendent of police, like about the law and order situation of the district, the first thing he mentioned to me was the district otherwise is usually quite calm and peaceful. It is only in the area of Sarni that where you are seeing a lot of crimes these days. Crimes mostly to do with theft and robbery. So I was curious why this was happening there. So my learned SP, he mentioned to me that the industry there is going down day by day, as Ruchi also mentioned. And now the jobs that are available there are like almost halved. And the people who have remained there, they take to stealing industry properties, the company properties, and so it's a daily occurrence there. It used to be a daily occurrence there. And when I have met the public representatives also, they were all very sensitive to the aspect that their town and their region is going down economically every other day. So I had the opportunity to tour around the district and also kind of compare this coal bearing area with other areas of the district also. And one thing I could make out was most of this coal bearing area was populated by outsiders, mainly who were educated and who were trained enough to get the jobs. The local people were the tribals, basically. They're all tribal blocks where the industries lie. They were usually left out of this direct line of employment. But yes, they always benefited from the economy being booming there and a lot of spending capacity that the people brought in, the employees brought in. But again, in general, if I talk about Betul, it is not part of the aspirational district setup, which has been mentioned in the synopsis here. Singrauli is part of aspirational district setup, but there are parallels to be drawn. Recently, I happened to visit Singrauli as part of my job. I am now into rural water supply. And one thing I can mention, which can be helpful to the study and to the understanding of coal-based areas also, because I heard one of the speakers talk about district mineral fund and how it is helpful to such districts where mining is going on well. So Singrauli is a case in point how district mineral fund can be useful for the development of that district. So Singrauli, being energy capital as it is called, now has a good road connectivity, a good water supply system for the urban centers, that is, and quite a good amount of health setups and educational setups. My purpose of visit was to cover the whole district through water supply projects using the DMF. I think it is the only such district all over India which will be covered under Jal Jeevan Mission through the DMF funds. It also has an airport coming up thanks to the DMF fund. So if you talk about funds at the district level, definitely these kind of funds which are kind of untied, not exactly untied, but kind of untied. And at the district level to make decisions and to direct the resources, they definitely help. Otherwise, most of the districts, they are dependent on the state budget. And state budget means we usually implement the flagship schemes and we get targets per district wise, depending on the strength of the districts. But if you are talking about managing and the after effects of any industry going out or phasing out, then definitely it would require a proper game plan and a proper funding pattern also. Therein, I think, lies the importance of, I think Mr. Mitra was talking about that, a particular fund which can be directed towards particular use. For a district like Betul, I think the situation will be same in other districts also. Betul also has a lot of illegal mining going on. The open cast mines are not there, but people do find certain areas where coal can be gathered and it can be siphoned off. So those issues also exist. But yes, because agriculture is not entirely sustainable. Just next to Betul is the flourishing, prosperous district of Hoshangabad, which is on Narmada. And there, the wheat productivity is like 40 quintals per hectare. Here in Betul, the land holdings are small and water irrigation facility are not entirely dependable. They are like uneven terrain. So the productivity would be somewhere around 15. That's a huge gap. And also it's at the mercy of the nature. So what happens is most of the people, they find it convenient to migrate, at least seasonal migration. And I can gather from my experience as Municipal Commissioner Bhopal, at least 4 of my corporators were from Betul because they represented the slums here. And those slums mainly consisted of people from Betul who had come to Bhopal for different job opportunities and service sector jobs. So that ways, Betul has been a labor supplier. During my term there also, we at 1 or 2 situations, we had to bring back our laborers from Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu also. In Maharashtra, they were employed in the sugarcane industry, and in Tamil Nadu, they were employed in the textile industry. So that mobility is there, and people do move out. But coming back to this particular topic, it would be interesting to understand and try to kind of anticipate what will happen once the coal industry phases out. So already there is a bit of movement wherein the locals feel that they are the have-nots and there are other people who are the haves. And there have been agitations, and we have handled a couple of law and order situation also. It would be interesting to know once this industry phases out, because it is the reality we are facing there, what will be happening there. And regarding other aspects, education and health, yes, that needs to be done there. One study that I can share definitely is, I had conducted a special study for students from 8th to 12th standard, just to check their oral health. I'm myself a dentist, so I had that interest that we had to conduct that. It was very interesting to note that out of 70,000 students we screened, at least 3,000 to 3,500 students, we could make out that they were in touch with tobacco. And some of them did carry lesions also. And furthermore, interesting aspect of the study was that most of these kids were near in and around Sarni, wherein the major coal activity is happening. I don't know how we could correlate this study. I just mentioned it because before we could actually get deep into the study, I was transferred. And I'm requesting the new collector to pursue it. But yes, for the way forward.
Tejaswi, good evening. Can I come in for a minute? If you don't mind, Coal Secretary has just joined. If you don't mind, we'll ask him to come on because he's a busy guy. He may be called away again. And so, is it okay? You can come in later.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Tejaswi, I'm sorry for interrupting you, and it was going along very well. And he already made two wonderful points. One about the utility of the district mineral fund, about which Amit had talked, and the other is this business of out-migration, which is happening because of the stress there. And we can learn from what he has done in Singrauli. And I hope you'll stay online, and we'll have you back as and when we are done with us with other people. Please stay online. I will now. It's a pleasure to invite Dr. Jain, who is the Secretary of the Coal Ministry, and he is one of our very senior civil servants who has a PhD in exploring the role of natural gas. He has held many important positions in his career, and he is an expert in energy policy and energy security scenarios. Welcome to you, Dr. Jain, and please, we are looking forward to your observations.
Sonali, we have Dr. A.K. Jain, Coal Secretary. Could you please make him live?
Sorry for interrupting.
Yes, sir. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
I am not able to hear.
Not me. You can't hear me?
The audio has gone down, sir. I think it doesn't matter. I'll finish my speaking and then maybe we'll.
Sure.
I was talking about the aftermath of the coal industry. It would be interesting to see how Betul will work out. We did. There are certain positives for Betul. Recently, a new mine has been sanctioned, and the gentry there is in general very excited about that new mine, and there is a lot of excitement among the local representatives also, who have been pursuing that, so that that comes up very fast. Apart from that, we had identified industrial land also, so that it adds to the Betul's economy. Recently in the central budget, I think there was this declaration about corridor between Itarsi and Vijayawada, freight corridor, which goes through Betul itself. And all these kind of developments should only add and should be able to help the shifting of people who have been displaced. Other than that, I would be very interested to listen to the European experience, because I heard something has been done there and how they are dealing with it. We need to chalk out a pointed program if we need to avoid further law and order situations and further degradation of the life that is going on there. And I think that's what I had in mind while speaking. And I again thank Ruchi for having me here, and also all the team of Terry for inviting me. It is really enriching to be part of this eminent gathering here. Right. Thank you.
Thank
you. Mr. Mitra, will you please unmute yourself?
It is now my privilege to call upon S.M. Vijayanand, former Chief Secretary of Kerala, one of our most distinguished civil servant, who was instrumental in the rollout of Manrega, which is a big rural employment guarantee program for people from outside. He's had a long experience in creating institutions for decentralized governance. and has a long experience in designing rural livelihood programs. Over to you, Vijay.
Thank you, Sanjay, for the nice words. I will quickly go through what could be the way forward and give some very, very practical, maybe rather bureaucratic suggestions. I went through the report on Betul, and I think this will be true of any other coal district. The first and foremost thing, which normally is not there in any district planning, is the eco-regeneration, what I would call healing the ecosystem. And initially, we can work on the commons. We can use the word watershed also, which will include regrassing, agroforestry, non-timber forest produce, and all that. And recently I heard through a work by the Foundation for Ecological Security, which works on commons, that by improving commons, you can earn up to about 4,000 rupees per acre just by improving it in a scientific manner. So when people are 90% are getting around 5,000, this is going to be a significant addition. The important point I wanted to make was agroecological farming for healing the environment. I've seen it in Andhra Pradesh, personally seen it. It's a very promising thing. People are really not taken to it. It's not easy to get started, but you can really heal the soil, enrich the soil, and even store some water. For want of time, I cannot get into details. So eco-regeneration being the first point. The second point, of course, is livelihoods. I want to make a very, very basic point. In India, in the current kind of situation, you can start livelihoods only with Narega. And Narega is initially for the basic cash, which will ensure that you have some money with you. And then only other activities will start. That's survival kind of cash. Then you get to do agriculture, horticulture using Narega. Excellent examples all over India. Natural resource management, slightly higher. And pro-poor assets, whether it be cattle shed or well, or kinds of things. So we do it in a very planned, settlement-based way, rather than just giving labor budget and work. It can have results. Start with the poorest areas first. Similarly for skills. And recently, I found out through a presentation by a young officer trainee of the academy, National Academy, that by skilling farmers, no additional thing, just by skilling farmers, and more importantly, skilling the agricultural labor. So that you have a skilled agricultural labor, looks like an improbability in India, but then productivity can go up by 30-40%. So skilling is not just for employment in high-wage sectors, it's also for agriculture. Then, of course, skilling for rest. And since people from Betul are willing to go out, this could be, but little more focus, not giving some vague training and sending them out, but tied to market, the kind of things which the National Rural Livelihood Mission tried to do, the skill part of it. Then, of course, what we have learned from Kerala, micro-enterprise possibilities. Little bit Gandhian, you sell locally, local products locally, and move out. It has got a multiplier effect. And something which we miss out, health, education, and nutrition are part of livelihoods. Only after this COVID, we are realizing that they are part of livelihoods. Otherwise, even in NRLM, we never looked at it. More important suggestions, yes, very plain suggestions, would be the institutions for these kind of activity. And I would say a partnership between the self-help groups and the Gram Panchayats. They are not improbable. If they come together, to put it in a high language, social democracy and political democracy can come together. A lot of people were talking about the social dimensions. A gendered social dimension is what SHGs bring. And I know SHGs are doing very well in Madhya Pradesh, one of the best in central India. So SHGs and Gram Panchayats can work together, and in tribal areas, of course, the grams. So institutionally, they are very critical. Building on this could be learning from AMUL, the farmer producer organizations, which have not done too well in India. But if you combine the lessons from SHG and lessons from cooperatives, probably a hybrid FPO, farmer producer organization, could work. Where do you get the funds? Of course, many of these areas have a district mineral fund. But I can tell you the 15th Finance Commission has given his award last week. It can come to almost 100 crore a district, depending on the size of the district. For Gram Panchayats, for the Panchayat institutions alone. Take MG and REGs, could be another 150 crores. So 250 crores of relatively untied money you have. Add CSS, CSR, and all this, you can. But something an organization like TERI should start doing now for the 16th Finance Commission. These kind of transition areas need to get a weightage in fund allocation. So I think you can build a very, very strong case, as earlier it was done for forest coverage by some environmental groups. I think it will be very good. And human resources. I mean, you don't have human resources at the cutting edge level anywhere in India, barring some southern states. So there's a brilliant concept which Andhra pioneered, which all states are doing, community resource person, not working as a volunteer, paid for the services, maybe low-end payment in agriculture, in all the things they can do from among the SHGs. So CRP is another important thing. And another thing which the Ministry of Rural Development innovated about 5-6 years ago is what is called cluster facilitation teams, basically from civil society organizations or from among volunteers. So you facilitate clusters because these require some intricate understanding, particularly in natural resources. Then there is a non-starter Government of India scheme. It's a priority scheme, prestigious scheme called Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, which means every educational institution from IIT and IIM has to do something for the villages. Get them around in these areas. Just spend 1 week in a year for at least doing a survey on a backward area. And this idea of Prime Minister's Rural Development Fellow is again has great potential in providing high quality, committed youth, maybe for 1 year, 2 years in these kind of areas. And there is also a concept which is little difficult in many of these kinds, what is called a voluntary technical corps. There are a lot of people who are educated. Now with Zoom, they can help give thoughts just as we are giving today from thousands of miles ago for local level development. But most important thing, that's the most important thing, is bottom-up planning. It's not just bottom-up planning. You can't have bottom-up planning. It's a kind of multi-level planning as we used to call when we entered service. And a forgotten institution, which is a constitutional body called the District Planning Committee. You can revive it. Certainly you can revive it with the kind of technical support you do there and some kind of spatial planning, which is brilliantly outlined, but nobody has understood what it is by our former president, Dr. Abdul Kalam, what's called Pura. That is, we are putting the space in the villages in such a way that villages become viable entities for local economic development and local human development. Let me conclude. All this cannot be done district-wise or pan-India, but you can create beacons, nurture clusters, which could be schools of practice for others to learn from. If you do it very painstakingly, in 7 or 10 years, some kind of local level development, preventing absolute starvation and crime can take place. And I can give you an example of one village panchayat in Kerala. Of course, Kerala, one village panchayat is about 5 MP village panchayats or 6 village panchayats or even 10 village panchayats. They have developed a carbon neutral gram panchayat just by local action. Outside the point, Terry should study it. Can you replicate it for clusters in India through local action in Wayanad district? And the last point is, it's not hearing from the people, but doing for the people. I think I saw that in your presentation. You have heard from the people, but this is doing by the people. And social justice or climate justice, as was hinted by Professor Kuntala. And I would request Terry to look at this paradigm of environment-based local development. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Vijay. As usual, crisp and clear, and some of the ideas are really wonderful, and we will, Terry, we will take them on board. I would like to call upon Mr. Jules Kortenhorst, Chief Executive Officer of the Rocky Mountain Institute. He's had a long and distinguished career in the in the fields of energy and climate change. And he has a very, currently he is working in the Rocky Mountain Institute, and I would like him to talk about what they call opportunities in the just transition thing. Mr. Jules, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for inviting me to speak here today about the just energy transition. With the continuously falling cost of clean energy technologies, including solar, wind and batteries, it is clear that the speed of the transition is accelerating around the world. Older technologies such as coal and gas increasingly struggle to compete in markets around the world. And while this transition will bring many benefits, in addition to lower energy costs, such as improved health outcomes and reduced emissions, those communities that have historically relied on the jobs in the fossil fuel economy will need our support in making the transition. With proper support, the benefits of clean energy transition will be widespread among all the communities in India. This is passionate to me. Let me tell you a story that is personal to me, and it relates to the transition away from coal in the southern part of my home country, the Netherlands. In the late 1970s, our Minister of Economic Affairs and Energy, Joop den Uyl, who was a staunch Labour politician, concluded that the outlook for coal production in the Netherlands was grim. Poor quality, deep mine coal near the town of Maastricht could simply not compete with the newfound riches in the northern part of the Netherlands. He led a nationwide effort to shut down the coal industry, but at the same time to massively invest in the economic development and new industries in and around the town of Maastricht. Today, that region flourishes as a knowledge, transport and innovation hub in the middle of Europe and has fully recovered from the transition away from coal. For me, this story illustrates the reality of the shifting economics in the energy system, but also of the deep commitment that is necessary to a just transition, a commitment that we owe to those involved in an industry that is destined to decline. There are several key factors pointing towards a rapid acceleration of the speed of the energy transition, including important drivers like policy and finance. But above all, it's the unrelenting pace of technology innovation and resulting cost declines in clean energy technologies. The rapidly falling cost of clean energy technologies is already leading to the deployment of zero carbon energy solutions at a massive scale. And fossil fuels, including coal and gas, can no longer compete with these low and continuously falling costs. In many parts of the world, it is now cheaper to build new wind and solar power capacity than it is to operate the existing coal and gas plants. This is particularly the case in areas of the world like India with excellent resource potential for solar. As the deployment of clean energy and particularly solar continues to scale and the learning rates drive down the cost even further, solar continues to fall so quickly that within the next 5 years, we believe that over 70% of global coal plants can be economically retired early while replacing them with new wind and solar. You can find more information about this in a recent RMI report that we call How to Retire Early, the Accelerated Coal Phase Out, and it is extremely relevant for the discussion that we have here today. But far from only moving away from the energy systems of the past, the energy transition also offers opportunities to move towards the systems of the future. And in India, those opportunities are really very significant. We are all familiar with the large scale-up of new solar power across India. But in your country, the future of electric mobility is also a particularly exciting opportunity. And let me hone in on that opportunity for a moment. According to a recent RMI report, the projected size of the 2030 electric vehicle loan market alone in India will be $50 billion. This market will span across mobility solutions from two-wheelers and three-wheelers all the way to heavy trucks and buses. This shift to electric vehicles implies, in turn, a huge market for batteries, which could reach 300 billion in 2030 in India alone. The shift towards electric mobility is happening not just in India, but also globally. Driven by relentlessly falling battery costs, EVs are becoming cheaper, not just in their total cost of ownership over the lifetime of the car, but soon also upfront. Bloomberg New Energy Finance analysis shows that by the middle of this decade, the average electric car in the US and Europe will be cheaper upfront than a comparable gasoline car. And along with cars, this shift is also accelerating among SUVs and trucks, delivery trucks, regional haul trucks, even long-haul trucks, rapidly moving to zero-emission designs. Here is a whole sector of the economy that can replace the jobs in coal areas, that can create new opportunities, both for the domestic market, but even for exports. And this is further enhanced by the electric vehicle mandates that are emerging around the world, from the European Union and California to China and India. The goal of ending all internal combustion engine sales by 2030 in India is especially ambitious. And also impressively, as India is already planning to exceed its Paris Agreement commitments, this all points to progress to come with massive new employment opportunities in new energy industries. The critical task now is to make those opportunities available to the individuals who are moving away from the energy sectors in the past, particularly from the coal industry. So in conclusion, India has a big opportunity for the just clean energy transition. Clean energy solutions, including wind, solar and batteries, but also very much electric vehicles, and in due course maybe even hydrogen, will all be key pillars for this transition. We need to embrace these opportunities because they will bring tremendous benefits for India's economy and for the communities that are now moving away from coal. With proper support, these benefits will accrue to communities across India. We must leverage these opportunities, in particular, to enable the just transition for those that leave a fossil fuel job behind. Thank you again for inviting me to speak. I look forward to the rest of our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules. Very clear, and we now have an idea of how to move forward in a proper framework for just transitions. I noticed that maybe Dr. Jain is available with us now. Anil Jain, Dr. Saab, are you available? Hi, glad to see you. You're muted.
Good evening, very much.
It's my privilege to welcome Dr. Anil Kumar Jain, who is now currently Secretary in the Ministry of Coal, Government of India. He's a senior officer of the Indian Administrative Service and handles all issues regarding to mining, transportation and distribution of coal. He has a PhD in exploring the role of natural gas in India's electricity sector and has seriously engaged with all issues of India's energy security policy. All yours, Dr. Jain.
Thank you very much. I have gone through some of these discussion papers which talk of the rehabilitation of the areas as well as the population living in those parts of the country where coal mining has been the main preoccupation. And there is a question and a challenge of how to rehabilitate them. And that particular question also confronts those mining areas, coal mining areas, where in future, when there is lesser demand and these mines, they shut their operations, so how to rehabilitate them in society. So what has happened in the past should be some kind of a primer or a lesson for what is going to happen to those of the workers who will in future be out of these jobs. So very quickly, coming to 2-3 strands of thought which I might share at this forum. Firstly, in India, coal mining areas happen to be concentrated in certain geographical regions. So those who are part of the Indian audience, they would know that Eastern India, states of Odisha, Jharkhand, and parts of West Bengal, and Central India, Madhya Pradesh, Eastern India, Chhattisgarh again, and Maharashtra. So these are the regions which are endemic in coal deposits and have historically, maybe 100 years plus, they have seen coal mining in a very big way. If you If you examine the local economy, if you travel through regions, many people call king coal. So those were the regions where the entire economy rotated around coal. And over the years, where the coal mining has stopped, of course, there is wilderness and there is desperation. But wherever coal is still continuing to be mined, so the entire economy is centered on coal. Lots of power plants have come up there, transportation, lots of contractors, and power grids and other systems are all present over there. So at the outset, let me mention that just like anywhere else in the world, maybe in Germany or maybe in Wales and other parts, UK, the coal has been the mainstay and continues to be the mainstay in certain geographical regions, and very difficult to imagine, what would happen if coal mining was to stop. So thankfully, while renewables catch up, within the electricity, total mix, wind and solar are about 10%. So, and coal, as we know, is around 65%. So gradually, while renewables rise and coal recedes, in terms of share, there is opportunity for all of us to help, rehabilitate and migrate the coal workers and the coal-based economy. And that is how the term just transition comes in. The challenges that we face, the prominent challenges that those areas where coal mining has been done, they have a double whammy of not only loss of jobs, but also degraded land environments. So in the past, of course, there wasn't so much of environmental consciousness. And in the case of India, we might say that in the 50s, 60s and 70s, before the coal sector was nationalized, the private sector was not very responsible, and maybe there wasn't so much of a mandate on sustainable mining practices. So many of these areas have seen, a very mindless kind of mining, where environmental and sustainability were not at all the considerations. Today, if you see whatever permissions that are given to coal mines, the environmental clearances and forest clearances, they are pretty watertight. And so the former coal mining areas are in a degraded state. And, the natural resource, which is the first, port of call for people in these areas, that is in a very weak shape. The good news is that most of these coal-bearing areas of India, they fall in high temperature, high rainfall region, and nature has the good practice of healing itself. So many of these areas are now rich in biodiversity, and vegetation has sprung back, and the dugout areas are in many places they are water reservoirs. So this is something which has to be thought through, that how do we deploy the one resource which is very scarce in India, and that is land. And these areas are now former coal-bearing areas. The rights were acquired. So those lands now belong to the government, or they belong to the coal companies, which is again a government company, Coal India Limited. So how can we deploy the lands over there, the natural resources, to the benefit of the local society? The second good news is that in India, at least since nationalization, which happened in early 1971, 72, 73, the pricing of coal was almost on what you call, cost plus regime. So the coal companies, the government coal companies, they built a lot of infrastructure. They built housing for the coal miners. They built hospitals. They built roads. They built, public utilities, because all of that expenditure could be loaded onto the coal price, which was then sold to the power sector. So when you travel to these regions, you will see that housing is intact, and a lot of this infrastructure is intact. But the economic opportunity, which was basically coal mining and the related downstream activities, that is no longer there. So infrastructure is in existence. So with these two good, favorable points, one being, of course, the natural environment is a healing one, and the second one being that physical infrastructure already having been paid for in existence there, we need to think of ways and means. And as I was hearing the previous speaker, Mr. Cotton Host, that there are opportunities. One does read about how the West has rehabilitated its former coal towns, and there are very, very imaginative things. I was reading about it that in the UK, one of these former coal mining towns, the high street over there has several bookshops, and it's a touristy place. And one of the book owners, he gives away rights to people who can come and sit as owners and sell books, and he's booked until 2035. So so they've been able to package it, and very attractive proposition. People come there, but we know that in the Indian circumstances, the population is so large, and the economy is you need to give them. You need to rehabilitate those areas before we can think of making them into anything worth the while. So these are challenges, but I'm sure that with the growth in the economy, 8 to 10%, India's GDP growing, and land being a valuable resource, and maybe these are things which the coal sector will have to concentrate on. It is a challenge. And but this is something which the coal company alone will not be able to take care of, because if it were to do so, then again, as it is, coal is now receding, and if the coal sector was vibrant and we were to impose this liability on them, it would have been possible to do so. But with power sector, thermal power plants, their PLFs falling to, at one time it used to be 74-75%, and now we are looking at mid-60s, and in future they may even fall below 60. So with the coal production meeting challenges of demand, it'll be difficult to load the entire thing. So some kind of an international low debt funding, and as we all know that in today's India, the solar power, the low tariffs that we are getting is largely happening because of a lot of foreign capital being pushed into it, which is coming at maybe 1% or 2% interest rates in comparison to India, where we still have 8% or so. So if that kind of a capital is deployed in some economic activities, not necessarily a grant or a subsidy, but some kind of an economic model can be found, because these are also the regions, the eastern region and central region, where there is a large demand base with a large population base, and as I mentioned, the infrastructure of utilities, etc., is intact. So these are things which, and finally, what I might say is that it's only recently that all this is getting a thought. So this topic having been chosen in this World Sustainable Development Summit definitely triggers some kind of a thinking, and everybody has to, academics and stakeholders, including Terry and all of us, have to sit down together, because this hasn't been given much of a thought, and even in the environment clearances that we have been obtaining, there is a talk of the rehabilitation of the dugout areas, but rehab of those people who lose their jobs. So what is truly the just transition, the human element, has not been thought through so far, and we will have to devise methodologies. So with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. I now call upon Mr. Ashok Sreenivas, Senior Research Fellow from the Prayas Energy Group, for his observations.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mitra. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to come on and speak after Mr. Anil Jain, with whom we've been actually working quite closely for quite some time. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers, WSDS, Terry, for organizing this discussion. And in particular, I'm very happy to see that we are having more and more of these discussions around the topic of just transitions, because I've been actually fortunate to be part of at least a few conversations on this topic in the last, let's say, few months, which in itself is a good indication of the fact that this is increasingly becoming a topic that we are all concerned about, and we are all, as a community, as a society, starting to think more and more about. And I'm also very happy to see the way this session has been framed, in which I've been asked to speak, where it's been framed as turning challenges into opportunities. I really like that framing, because every transformation, every transition brings with it certain opportunities. And the question is, how best do we use those opportunities in order to move forward from wherever we are? And I see the opportunities as twofold in terms of what we can do. So one of them is in terms of what kind of lessons we can learn from the mistakes of the past and how best we can avoid them. And the second is, what are the new kinds of new ways that we can forge as we go forward. And I will try and share some thoughts along these lines in the next few minutes. And I also want to, apart from, I think one topic that many of us have talked about, and I will also talk a little bit about, is this whole issue of how best do we phase out the old, which is coal, in a manner that is very just. But I also want to touch upon a little bit on how do we phase in the new, which is renewables, also in a just manner. It is not that injustices or inequities exist only when we phase out the old, but one could actually have inequities and injustices even when we phase in the new. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. It's not that everything that is green is necessarily bright and shining, and that's something to keep in mind as well as we talk of just transitions. To begin with, I think I want to acknowledge that I concur with many of the points of view that Mr. Amit Kumar expressed in the beginning, and Mr. Vijayanand also talked about in terms of strengthening, let's say, subnational institutions, the critical role that they have to play, the fact that local capacities need to be built up in order to actually be able to implement any of the just transition ideas or plans that we come up with, and the fact that in a country as vast and diverse as India, there is not going to be a single custom-made solution, and one needs to really not going to be a single one-size-fits-all solution, and we really need to find custom solutions or bespoke solutions depending on the particular context that we're talking about, which only makes the problem more challenging. But nonetheless, that's a reality, and I guess we have to work towards identifying these right kinds of solutions. So some of the thoughts that I have on these lines are in terms of, let's say, when we're talking about reimagining the future of communities that have been dependent on coal, whether it is coal mining directly or industries that depend on coal, such as thermal power generation or other kinds of downstream industries of the coal sector. I think there has been a lot of discussion and very important discussion around issues such as skilling, around alternative employment, around education, around public health infrastructure, and all of which are completely valid. And I think I second most of them. And there is no doubt that we need to do those things. But I also want to bring in another dimension to this discussion, that while all these are important, I think it's equally important to ask the question of where do we want to go from where we were? The fact that these communities or people have become dependent on coal, I would like to posit that it is not necessarily by their own choice. They happen to be living in a land where there was coal resources, and they were kind of willy-nilly dragged into a coal-based economy, which might have been the case in the past, but that need not be the case in the future. I think so. The point I'm trying to get at is that as we think about a new future for these locations, these areas, these communities, these societies, I think these communities and societies themselves need to be important partners in terms of reimagining what this new future is going to be. While there could be top-down ideas in terms of how these new futures can be thought about, while people like us in these rooms can discuss what these new futures could be about, I think it's equally important to make sure that we engage these communities a lot more in terms of actually conceptualizing what this new future is going to be. And I think Mr. Vijayanand also touched upon some of these things when he said that it cannot be a top-down approach, but a bottom-up planning is what is needed. And a bottom-up planning, I believe, one of the very important elements of that is actually involving those who are actually most closely connected to these issues in the planning process itself. And I'm sure that these communities themselves have a lot of knowledge about their own communities, about their environment, about their capabilities, and about their cultures, and so on and so forth, based on which they will have important contributions to make as to what the new future is going to be. And a second point that I want to talk about in terms of the future for these kinds of areas and localities is, again, something that has been touched upon by Mr. Vijayanand in particular, and I think Mr. Anil Jain also alluded to it in his speech just before me, is that one needs to go beyond livelihoods. I think the whole the critical role of restoring the ecology, the ecological restoration of these locations should not be undermined, and they should be a very important part of this transition that we're talking about, because that in a way could it in itself become an important vehicle for the kinds of livelihoods which are not only sustainable but also shall we say desirable livelihoods for people to live and to carry forward going into the future beyond coal. So I think while livelihood is an important part of the equation, the whole ecosystem in which these livelihoods are going to be built up is also an important thing to consider, and we need to see how that can be brought about. As Mr. Jain said, currently we have the funding mechanisms that we have. There is some kind of a funding that's available for closure of mines, but that's not the same as restoring the entire locality, and that is something that also needs to be thought about. I want to spend the last minute or two. The last point I want to touch upon is the other topic that I mentioned right at the beginning, which is that just transitions does not only apply to ensuring that those who are going to be losing their livelihoods because of a transitioning away from coal need to be protected. Of course, they need to be, and we need to find solutions for them. But we also need to make sure that when we are phasing in the new, whether it's renewables or whether it's other forms of newer technologies, that also needs to be done in a just and fair manner. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think we all can agree that in the past we have made mistakes in this country in terms of how land and other natural resources have been acquired from communities. And as we all know, renewables-based development, especially centralized renewables-based development, is a very land-intensive activity. And I'm afraid to say that some of the concerns that we had seen earlier are already beginning to emerge in the nascent renewable energy space also. There have been reports of how local communities have not been entirely part of the process of how land has been taken from them, how the land is being converted to other forms of uses, how they have been compensated or not for taking away their land. The whole issue of so-called wastelands, which are also commons, how we regard them. So I think there are many issues here which also need to be part of the discussion, while we all justly need to be enthusiastic and should promote the adoption of more renewable energy so that we as a country move towards environmentally benign forms of energy. We should also ensure that the practices that we follow while this happens are something that actually keep the local communities in mind. And remember that it's not that renewable energy has zero, shall we say, social or other impacts. And one must try to ensure that whatever impacts they have are also minimized. For example, one very simple thing that I think should be part of the process is today renewable energy projects are not even necessarily subjected to an environment clearance process, which perhaps is a lacuna, and one needs to at least think about whether one needs to have some kind of a oversight mechanism to how this whole process takes place. Or this is just one thought, but maybe there could be other things also. But the larger point being that the phasing in of renewables also needs to be done in a just fashion, apart from worrying about the justness of how we phase out of the older forms of energy economy. So I'll stop there and back to you, Mr. Mitra. Thanks.
Now I have three speakers who were there right from the word go. I apologize to you, Anna, and I apologize to you, Moutushi, and to Mike. You were there from word go, and I must compliment you on your patience and forbearance. Anna, the floor is yours. A distinguished linguist, a distinguished public servant with a long history of engagement with coal transition issues. Thank you. All yours, Anna, please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the World Sustainable Development Summit and to share with you our European outlook on the just transition in line with the European Green Deal. Let me start by saying that European Green Deal is the most ambitious energy and climate policy in the world, but it's also much more. It is all-encompassing, future-oriented growth strategy to transform our economy and to allow Europe and its citizens to prosper without harming the environment and the climate. Here I would like to underline that the European Union has put just transition at the very heart of its roadmap towards a resilient, climate-neutral and future-proof economy. And we at the European Commission, we are all committed to deliver on the increased 2030 targets and our 2050 goals, leaving no one behind. However, at the same time, we do recognize that not all regions and not all countries have the same starting point on the path to climate neutrality. That's why our European Green Deal includes a just transition chapter, which provides specific support to regions and people most affected by just transition. This, of course, includes regions with ongoing coal mining activity and people currently active in the coal sector. The Just Transition chapter of the European Green Deal builds upon the activities of Initiative on Coal Regions in Transition, which was launched indeed 3 years ago. With our Initiative for Coal Regions in Transition, we support countries, EU countries and regions to manage the process of phasing out from coal. And in this way, the European Commission is facilitating the dialogue on just, fair, and sustainable transition of coal regions across the European Union. Our transition, our initiative is an open forum for stakeholder dialogue across 34 coal regions across 14 European member states. What is important to say that it is the wide community of stakeholders who are in fact a driving forces of our initiative for coal regions in transition. And these stakeholders include representatives from the EU, national, regional and local authorities, and as well as industry, trade unions, NGOs, youth organizations, grassroots organizations, academia, and experts in energy transition. Together, not only do we share common challenges with the energy transition across Europe, but above all, we come up with concrete solutions, how to assist the regions and local communities with the transition, which is especially important in this context. Such meetings are useful to create a feeling of community between the European coal regions and their respective stakeholders. We also give regular updates on the status of coal phase-out in the EU and also on the exchange of practices around different transition-related topics, such as energy transition, environmental rehabilitation, economic diversification, reskilling programs, governance mechanisms, and how to involve stakeholders in the process, because it's also not easy. So through our Secretariat for Technical Assistance to Regions in Transition, we provide a dedicated support for 7 coal regions and help them in devising their transition strategies. And also we help in developing specific investment projects in energy transition. Our initiative for coal regions in transition also serves as a knowledge hub on transition-related topics. It has a toolkit on environmental rehabilitation and repurposing, on employment and welfare support, and as well on governance on transition and transition strategies. We last year organized a special webinars when we presented those toolkits, and I warmly invite you to look at our websites and to follow the webinars and to see those toolkits. But it's quite important that it's not only about the technical advisory knowledge platforms, it's and the exchange of good practices. We also are aware that special dedicated funding is needed. So as of this year, we hope the coal region transition will be able also to tap into variety of funding programs for just transition and clean energy transition. In fact, just transition mechanism, with what previous speakers mentioned, is a key funding tool to ensure that the just transition towards the climate neutral economy happens in a fair and just way. As a part of the European Green Deal and its objective to achieve climate neutrality, we created all these funding instruments. And one of the main pillars, the first pillar of Just Transition mechanism, so-called Just Transition Fund, with a series of grants. And Just Transition Fund aims to accelerate our work with the stakeholders in coal and carbon-intensive regions by providing specific grants for the regions and municipalities to finance projects that require public funding. And the focus of Just Transition Fund will be on supporting economic diversification of the territories most affected by climate transition, and also on facilitating the reskilling and active inclusion of the workers in these territories. So all the issues which are the backbone of just transition and what we indeed discussed today in our session. Our two pillars of just transition mechanism include risk private investment to facilitate access to loans. And also the third pillar is about public loan facility, which aims to help public entities with access to de-risk and cheap loans. However, for the beneficiary regions and the stakeholders to tap into this funding instruments, they need to prepare together. So member states, our countries are preparing currently the territorial just transition plans, in which they clearly outline what are the transition challenges and what are the mitigation measures, and those plans will be later approved by European Commission, and based on that the funding will be distributed. We also have other different sources of funding which we are putting forward that European countries can tap into. For instance, the Innovation Fund, which is designed to finance projects offering innovative ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We also put forward Modernization Fund, specifically designed for 10 member states of Central Eastern Europe, which will support the decarbonization of the industry and energy system across the EU using mature technologies. And what the mechanism which we are very much proud of, the newest mechanism that we put forward, is our new recovery instrument called Next Generations EU. Because indeed, we're putting big emphasis and we are investing in generation, in our children, in our grandchildren. So we have to think in the long term, in the future term. And this new recovery instrument, Next Generation EU, will foster recovery and resilience all over Europe and deliver on the European Green Deal. And here, 37% of the recovery and resilient facilities must be spent on climate-related investments to speed up energy transition in order to meet the 30% climate mainstreaming target. All in all, as you can see, we're quite well equipped to embark on the challenging journey of energy transition towards climate neutrality 2050. But here, let me be clear. The efforts on the European level alone will not make the just transition a success without the involvement of all the stakeholders. As the example of European Initiative for Coal Regions in Transition demonstrates, we need national, regional, and local authorities, as well as stakeholders from a broader social society, businesses, trade unions, academia, youth organizations, NGOs on the board to make sure that the energy transition happens in such a way that no region, no citizen is left behind in a just way. So let me finish by wishing you lots of success in the journey towards a just transition and lots of inspiring discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anna Sobczak. It was a great talk, and I'd like to compliment you on your forbearance. And we also have a new member of the audience from our home. Welcome. Moutushi, all floor is all yours. She's the director of the India MacArthur Foundation in India. Long experience of working in the corporate and the development sectors. And please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start by thanking Terry and the WSDS organizers for including this thematic track on just transitions. As a foundation which has been long invested in India's development story, it has been highly encouraging to note the steps that India has taken to emerge as a leader on climate action on the global stage. It has been a privilege to work with a cohort of highly capable civil society organizations who in turn have been closely working with several central ministries, state departments, and industrial bodies to develop and execute interventions that directly contribute to the country's climate goals. I'm happy to share with this group that since 2015, the MacArthur Foundation has made 71 grants amounting to $47 million to India as part of its climate solutions grant-making strategy. We strongly believe that India has a tremendous role to play in keeping the world on track for a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase and remain deeply impressed by the progress that has been achieved so far. We aim to stay engaged and amplify our support on actions that will enable India transition to a clean energy future. As a direct result of a strategy refresh exercise that the Foundation undertook last year, there is an added layer of consideration for all our grant making going forward. The Foundation's grants will focus on action that ensure that the clean energy transition happens in ways that are just and equitable for all communities involved. There's been quite a bit which has been said about this earlier in the session, and I totally agree that we have to look at it from both ends, both from the point of view of introducing renewable energy as well as transitioning away from fossil fuels. Incidents of COVID-19 and its adverse impacts on jobs, livelihoods, and the economy have just reconfirmed our faith in taking a holistic approach to development. And going forward, we have very strong conviction that the transition process will be sustainable only if stakeholder communities participate as co-creators and contributors rather than only as an impacted group. We will be keeping the element of justness, which has been said before, to say that nobody should be left behind at the core of our grant making, both in reducing or eliminating adverse impacts and also to bring stronger focus on equitable outcomes from the work that is supported. This is a new area for us in some ways. There is much to be learned and new pathways to be identified to ensure that the transition remains equitable. We are still trying to get a deeper understanding of policies and actions that should be taken now so as to minimize adverse impacts in the future. How do we build in true costs of the transition, ensuring adequate attention to personal and social trade-offs? What elements do we compulsorily build in to make sure that all stakeholders are duly involved in decision-making? And how do we support households and communities who will find themselves at the adverse end of this transition process? These are big questions for us at the moment and which we are trying to comprehend better. It is heartening to know the growing attention on the subject and for institutions like Terry to invest efforts to unpack this challenge so that solutions can be developed. I hope the trend continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moutushi. Thank you for your presentation. I now call upon Mr. Mike Ward, who is a Senior Evaluation and Sustainability Consultant from the Climate Investment Fund. Mike, why don't you tell us about your work in South Africa? We'd be very happy to hear about it. Please.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege really for the Climate Investment Funds to be working with Terry on a case study on just transitions in India. As a very brief background, the Climate Investment Funds have made over $8 billion available to finance climate-related projects in 72 developing countries. And within the SIF, the Evaluation and Learning Program provides a learning laboratory for supporting transformational change. As part of this work, the Climate Investment Funds, in collaboration with the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, has established the Just Transition Initiative to support a range of partners to enhance just transitions principles and practices. So there are a whole range of resources that we're developing there at justtransitionsinitiative.org. In particular, the SIF is using projects that we've developed with the multilateral development banks as sites of learning about just transitions. And a part of this work, we synthesized a framework for understanding the different dimensions of justice and just transitions. So these dimensions include issues of social inclusion, procedural justice, so who is involved, issues of distributional justice, who gets what, and transformational intent, which is really around what needs to change for us to achieve procedural and distributional justice in the context of climate change at the kind of scale that we need it to happen. In order to ground and iteratively improve the framework on just transitions, the SIF is working on a number of national case studies. As you mentioned at the beginning, a case study on South Africa that was finalized last year, a case study in India that we're currently finalizing, a case study in Bolivia looking at the just transitions implications for water allocation that we're about to start, and in Ghana on the just transition implications for access and use of forest resources. And out of these case studies, I think I'd like to summarize 7 sort of high-level insights for planning and investing coming out of this work. The first is that to plan for just transitions, priority geographical areas need to be identified based on the relative importance of the barriers to and drivers of coal transitions. It's really important to map these strategic areas for just transitions initiatives. In South Africa, we found that 80% of the impact of coal phase out will be felt in just one province, and within this province, within 4 districts, really around 4 towns. Similarly, in India, the greatest impact will be felt in 5 or 6 states. The second insight that we found was the need to establish working relations and capacity building processes within and across national and state government departments for just transitions. It's particularly important where the benefits of shifting to renewable energy are felt in one part of the country. In South Africa, it's in the western part of the country, whereas the coal decline is felt on the eastern side of the country. Similarly, in India, there are large geographic distributions of the benefits and impacts, negative impacts. And so there's a need for national funding mechanisms, as it's not enough to have local corporate social investment linked to new projects, new energy projects. The third insight is to put in place processes that support the recognition and empowerment of often marginalized stakeholders who will be important in just transition processes. We need to establish local level platforms for social inclusion and formal engagement and build the capacity of stakeholders to influence just transition outcomes. Fourth insight was to provide support for developing systemic modeling and scenario planning at the local level that aligns with state and national planning related to energy transitions. It's really important for this planning to take place as it kind of undermines, I think, and exposes entrenched interests and vested interests and provides a shared basis for dialogue and planning. The fifth insight was to develop detailed transition plans, including priority activities, timelines, and budgets through collaborative, informed, and empowered stakeholder engagement. In 2016 in South Africa, the unions were surprised by the announcement of coal power plant phase-outs or closures, and it led to really significant national protest and the polarization of labour and civil society groups, and ultimately an approach to the High Court to stop the procurement of renewable energy. Sixth insight was to develop budgets for transition, including funding requirements. This could include technical assistance, capacity building at the local level to mobilize national and international support for just transition processes, including concessional finance to lower risk, support innovation, and accelerate change. And the seventh insight I think I'd like to share is to establish institutional frameworks and the environmental and social frameworks required to support the implementation, monitoring, and learning related to just transitions. We need to fund these learning processes and skills development requirements for implementation, monitoring, and evaluation if we're going to support the development of just transition principles, practices, and processes. But I'd like to say thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mike. The floor is now open for discussions, and anybody who has a question may kindly raise his or her hand, and then I'll try and refer him or her to the appropriate speaker. Welcome. I remember seeing one question from Mr. Juneja on the qualifications of the educators, and particularly vocational training schools and higher education educators. Are you still on, Mr. Juneja? Okay. Anybody else that would like to come in with a question at this stage?
Sanjay, can I maybe just answer that question, just to give a quick thought on it? I think that one of the issues around skills development is that we're often waiting for these initiatives to take place, and then we're trying to almost retrospectively and scramble to put the skills in place. And we need a much stronger kind of labor intelligence process that allows us to do anticipatory skills development. We need to anticipate what skills will be needed in the future, and then start to develop those early on. And that requires, as I say, a kind of labor intelligence, skills intelligence piece of work at national level.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else that would like to say anything? Ruchi, if I have your permission, then we'll close the session with thanks to all the speakers, and particularly people from abroad who waited for a long time to speak and did so with the minimum of fuss. I'm again grateful to them. I'm grateful to Amit, who also landed up very early, and to Moutushi again. I just want to add one thing here that, I think this study that Ruchi and Amit have done is of significant importance, is of great significance. And I have worked in these areas, and I think there is a need to replicate them across the 5 or 6 states where this is going to happen, because each state is different. And I think we need to take Kuntala's observation and view on the informal coal. Because, once you have tabulated all the chaps who work in the formal coal industry, where there is a list and where people can be identified, but there are people who are in the informal coal industry who will just actually fall between the cracks. So I think there is a great scope here for replication of this study across the various states of the country. And with this, I'd like to end this discussion by again thanking all of you for sparing so much time and spending so much your effort. Thanks to this young colleague of mine, Tejaswi, for his interventions. Thanks to all of you. Ruchi, anything else that you want me to do, or should we have say good night and everybody moves off?
Yeah, I think I'll join you in thanking everybody too.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And good night. Yeah.
Bye-bye.